Thank you, Stephen. And thanks to the Poetry Foundation for inviting me and for all of its support over the years, publishing me in the magazine. And thanks to you guys for coming out in the rain. If you're from Chicago, you're probably used to bad weather, but still, thank you anyway. All right, so I brought two of my books and then a bunch of newer poems. And I'm mostly going to read, I'm going to read from itself, the newest book that Steve was mentioning, but I'm just going to read one poem from the earlier one, Just Saying. I decided that this one, the first poem in Just Saying, was my favorite poem in Just Saying, so I decided I would read that. Scripture. Your violins pursue the downhill course of streams, even to their wild curls and cowlicks. To repeat is not to catch. Consider the hummingbirds, how they're gussied up and monomaniacal as the worst or best of you. Consider the bright, streamlined emergency they manifest. My leaves form bells, top knots, small cups of sex, overweening, unstoppered. Not one of you, with all your practice, is so extravagantly coiffed. Okay, so this is the cover of itself, which I like very much. It's got this crazy crab on it. I started writing this poem when I was reading maybe a Scientific American article about subatomic particles, which I do sometimes just because it boggles my mind in a way that sometimes jars a poem out of me. And it's called chirality. Chirality means a couple things, one in chemistry and one in a different thing in physics, but it has to do with relative orientation in space. That's not so important, but anyway. Chirality. If I didn't need to do anything, would I? Would I oscillate in 2 or 3 dimensions? Would I summon a beholder and change chirality for him? A massless particle passes through the void with no resistance. Ask what it means to pass through the void. Ask how it differs from not passing. And this one also started with, I think, a Scientific American article. Conclusion. A man is upset for many years because he's heard that information is destroyed in a black hole. Question. What does this man mean by information? The example given is of a cry for help, but this is accompanied by the image of a toy spaceship upended and is thus not to be taken seriously. The man recovers his peace of mind when he ceases to believe in passing through, when he becomes convinced that the lost information is splattered on the event horizon. The detective is the new mime. She acts out understanding the way a mime climbs an invisible wall. It's because our senses are so poor that on CSI, the investigators stand stock still, boulders in a stream, while a crowd pours around them. They pan in slow motion, reminding us of cameras, then focus with inhuman clarity on the pattern of cracks in a wall. God's fractal stammer pleasures us again. Price points. On a traffic island, a man waves his arms as if conducting music and takes bows. He gets no points for originality. Plus, we're sick of being represented. The tabloids are right. An appearance requires scandal. To be notable, something must appear instead. Of what? This spike reflects global demand for food products. Eden. About can mean near or nearly. A book can be about something, or I can be about to do a thing and then refrain. To refrain is to stop yourself. A refrain is a repeated phrase. This table is an antique from the early machine age. The indented circle within a circle motif, which appears at 3-inch intervals around the base, may be a nod to craftsmanship, or maybe a summary dismissal of same. It is charming in its mute simplicity. People will ask, why should we care about this unattractive character, despite the fact that turning yourself into an admirable character has been considered gauche for as long as I can recall? The word transparent is often affixed to such efforts, while the mystification surrounding the unflattering self-portrait at least provides some cover. Now someone will say, you don't need cover unless you're standing naked at a window shouting, look up here. This one takes a little bit of explanation. I was invited to participate in an anthology, and all the poets who were invited were asked to rewrite a sonnet of Shakespeare's, and they were assigned a sonnet, which of course seemed so daunting that my first impression was to say, are you crazy? But then I looked at the sonnet 3, which was not one that I was really familiar with. It's not one of the most famous ones. And just the whole psychology of it seemed so weird. In it, I guess, as in all the early sonnets, but I hadn't really thought about this. I'm not a scholar. But in all of the early sonnets, apparently, Shakespeare is they're called the procreation sonnets, and Shakespeare is addressing a really attractive young man and telling him that it would behoove him to marry and have kids because he's just so attractive. And just the psychology of that seems so convoluted, Is that like the weirdest come on ever? Or is Shakespeare working for, the guy's father? Or, what is the deal here? So I just put all of that together into a just perverse version of the sonnet. Sonnet 3. Your dad told me to tell you how good you look to him right now. Check yourself out. I'm sure you do. You're a very pretty boy. But the thing is, that won't last. Have you ever seen a pert old man? An insouciant septuagenarian? I thought not. They're invisible. And you'll be invisible too. What will your dad have to look at then? Do you think growth rebounds each year? Wrong. It has to be outsourced, sublet. Get with the program. Your dad will be watching. Itself. I work it until sweetness rises of itself, then arcs across, unfurling petals, and is gone. On television, hundreds of albino crabs scuffle over one steam vent. I know you're dreaming things I haven't dreamed, wouldn't, but that's part of your costume, like your extra appendages. Headlong. As one may be relieved by the myriad marigold faces held aloft beside the freeway, their articulation, and too by the rush of notes following their own likenesses in these headlong phrases. Relieved of what? Relieved of what? I'm already skipping things. Let's see what time it is. Oh, I shouldn't skip things. I might have to go back to things. I always do that in readings. I go, nah, nah, nah. Believing. When did you first learn that the bursts of color and sound were intended for you? When did you unlearn this? Believing yourself to have a secret identity can be a sign of madness. On the other hand, the lack of a secret identity can lead to depression. Many have found it useful to lie down as men, believing themselves to be little girls, or as girls, believing themselves to be mermaids stranded in their own bodies. Control. We are learning to control our thoughts, to set obtrusive thoughts aside. It takes an American to do really big things. Often I have no thoughts to push against. It's lonely in a song about outer space. When I don't have any thoughts, I want one. A close-up reveals that she has chosen a plastic soap dish in the shape of a giant sea turtle. Can a thought truly be mine if I am not currently thinking it? There are two sides to any argument, one arm in each sleeve. Maybe I am always meditating, if by that you mean searching for a perfect stranger. Holiday. The ad for the American Moment says, "Make today famous." That little nobody, bury her under the foundation. Rome did. Have her wear that seasonal affective collapse get up. Keep an eye in the sky on it. Live through. Fairy tales enchant the cast-off, one cut out of the third person. You watch the storm bear down on you on television. I hope I never have to live through this again. Find Nemo in the sea of bodies, ooze and muscle, little flick tail. Expression. Give me your spurt of verbs, your welter of pronouns desiring to be spread. Bulge-eyed, clear-bodied brine shrimp bobbing to the surface. I prefer the hermit trundling off in someone else's exoskeleton. But we all come down to self-love which, like a virus, has no love and has no self. It's a little grim, I guess, huh? You think? Now that I hear it. New way. We punch our secret code onto the image of the earth as seen from space. We earmark trauma. Looked at in a new way, trauma is. Looked at from upside down, nothing has happened yet. Just put words down, one after the last. Just get out, in time, of there. All right, so I have a new and selected coming out next year, in September, I guess. So I'm going to read some poems from the new part of the new and selected next. All right. Word problems. If a fat man with one earlobe distended by a large ring and a thin man in a heavy neck chain sit together checking email, the real is made up of things minus appearance. Near eucalyptus strands of green crescents and their shadows flighty half moons, while the soul is made up of appearance minus things. The ether. We're out past the end game where things get fuzzy, less thingy. Though in past times we practiced precision, concrete as a slot machine. But to be precise, you need to stop a moment, which turns out to be impracticable, and besides, speed is of the essence. Don't worry, of can take care of itself. And it's fine to say essence, now that it's understood to mean ether, a kind of filler made either of inattention or absorption somewhere near the Planck length. And this one, probably some of you have seen what I was writing about here. I was in New York City, like a couple of times really, and it seemed like all the taxi cabs had these little billboard ads on the top, on the roof, advertising a strip club called the Gentleman's Club. And the expression on the model's face was just sort of haunting. I couldn't figure out what that expression was. I kept looking at it going, what is she going for there? Because you know she's a model, so it's put on. And the photographer wants her to make that expression. So what is that expression? Anyway, so I wrote up this. Easily, the models in the Gentleman's Club ad are posed with pink mouths slack, eyes narrowed to slits. Show me stunned resentment. The way the world absorbs an insult, it won't easily forget. The difficulty. This film, like many others, claims we'll enjoy life now that we've come through difficulties, dangers, so incredibly condensed that they must be over. If the hardship was undergone by others, we identified with them. And if the danger was survived by simpler life forms, they're included in this moment when the credits roll and we don't know when to stand. And this was an ekphrastic poem, which I never do, but I was invited to write something to accompany an art work that was going to be in a show in the Guggenheim. So, I tried. the artwork was by Powell Altheimer. It was a sculpture. It kind of looked like a mummy with the wrappings coming off, tattered, but also working on something, like with a work basket sitting in a chair. So, the poem's only loosely related, but anyway. Life's work. Did I say I was a creature of habit? I meant the opposite. I meant behavior is a pile of clothes I might or might not wear. Before all the sowing and reaping could go on for centuries, before the calendar, I must have been convinced that my movements were both mandated and blessed. I've never been an old woman knitting by a fire, but I've played one in images where it meant being foolish or wise, a mistress of distraction's indirection. To rock while entwining is life's work, but I am reckless, restless. And this is kind of perversely, sort of a eulogy for, my husband who's still alive. Just imagining what it would be like, for him not to be around. In a sad way, I'm saying. The in a good way comes later, no. Before. Would my life be like a letter to you then? We never wrote letters. I'm passing the signs we slipped by together. There goes soda and swine. That name is funny because it's a joke we shared about alliteration, right? If I can describe the feeling of your absence precisely, which means using the names of things, buds blacken against blanched light, as ever. St. Didacus's bells ditty reminds us of itself, something old and automated, dividing before from now. Again and again, these two, for a moment, still similar. All right, and then, let me see how much time I have left. Yeah, some time left. I'm going to read even newer poems. So this also has something to do with science, a little bit, in that it started with a conversation I was having with an astrophysicist, but it's not all about that. Making. What made this happen, you ask, every time, as if compulsion itself were mandatory. The way light travels at the speed of light, because it must. It is in no sense essential that this crown of leaves, sifted by wind, as if turning over some problem, is a gray-green brightening into rust red at the tips, or that its equivocations fill this instant to the brim, while light has caught up to itself again and only seems to be making time. And then this one is called the craft talk. Sometimes poets are invited to give craft talks about how they write. And it always makes me very ambivalent because I can think of things to say, but I don't know if I mean any of them or truly believe them, So that's kind of what started this off. And it's not that I don't believe these things, it's that I kind of do. The craft talk. So that the best thing you could do, it seemed, was climb inside the machine that was language and feel what it wanted or was capable of doing at any point, steering only occasionally. The best thing was to let language speak its piece while standing inside it, not like a knight in armor, exactly, not like a mascot in a chicken suit. The best thing was to create in the reader or listener an uncertainty as to where the voice she heard was coming from, so as to frighten her a little. Why should I want to frighten her? Speech acts. Something's going around. The crows started it. No language can tell us which crow. You who in the mama turnpike, sexy tough shit, steady state, thought bubble song churn. What's new? Presence as fad. Humans photobomb the planet, pop up everywhere because incongruous is funny and we want you to know. Object permanence. This is practically a brand new one. What if the ability to capture emblems in the wild won't validate us? What if displaying our embarrassing flaws won't save us? Say being dead, but kittenish. I can't show you anything new, not even an empty room behind a velvet rope. Least of all that. There's a Lexus spinning in a parking lot because a mountain road is so cliche. It's throwing up dust, then more, but you know the car's still in there somewhere, still voguing. This one, I shouldn't say this, but I'm saying this just for someone I used to work with who's probably done the same thing. Sometimes at my job, they would make those of us who were full-time go and watch the classes of those who were part-time and sort of evaluate them. And I actually started writing this when I was supposed to be writing such an evaluation. The students were it was a fiction class, and the students were writing, or the student who was being workshopped had been writing about zombies, and then so these were some of the questions that the other students were raising. The kind of workshop discussion gets into it. Background information. There's a lot going on in the zombie apocalypse. But wouldn't she recognize that her mother was a zombie? I mean, zombies are a thing. The last thing she did was point to one corner of the ceiling with a horrified stare. The nurse called this a seizure, as if words drained experience of content and continued to accumulate, as if words were sealed containers stored for safekeeping. The background is everything that, for now, can be safely ignored. And this, I think, is the last, probably, of the science-themed ones. I was reading a book. It was very difficult. I don't think I finished it, but about quantum physics as it appears, as it is used in living systems. Apparently, chlorophyll in plants makes use of some aspect of quantum physics. So anyway, this is kind of based on my take on what I read. The emotional life of plants. An exciton consists of the escaped negative electron and the positive hole it left behind. This binary system is unstable and must be transported quickly to the processing center, which in practice means the exciton must be left strictly alone so that it travels all ways at once, going nowhere, but also going directly to the factory floor. Leaving aside the question of what it means for a positive whole to be left behind and also to travel as half of a system, this happens because nothing can be still and because for the lonely, direction is meaningless. Flicker. When it was them, our parents, dying, the way they tried to deny, I'm going to start again, blah. When it was them, our parents dying, the way they tried to deny what was happening, the way they were angry at the wrong things, seemed of a piece with the way they'd always been wrong about us, we thought. The way they were wrong about the world, which they saw only through the haze of their own swath of the past, so that it seemed natural for us to scoff inwardly, even at their deaths. But now it was one of us threatening to get up and walk out of the hospital on his withered legs, sheer sticks, because it was killing him. Clouds of methane rise from dumps outside our city, and I drop a square of soft cheese through a slot into a bin marked landfill. Of course I feel bad about feeling good, about feeling bad about this. But as time speeds up, everything will flicker. This is a kind of love poem, I guess. Negotiations. The best part is when we're tired of it all in the same degree, a fatigue we imagine to be temporary, and we lie near each other, toes touching. What's done is done, we don't say, to begin our transaction, each letting go of something without really bringing it to mind, until we're lighter, sicker, older, and a current runs between us where our toes touch. It feels unconditional. Remember this, we don't say. The little mermaid was able to absorb her tail, refashion it to form legs. This meant that everything's negotiable and that everything is played out in advance, in secret. Fusion. When we recognize, we think again. without knowing what or if we thought before. I confuse copper with brass. To recognize is almost always a pleasure. Perhaps it is pleasure itself. I confuse Melissa with Melissa. To recognize is not only to give something a name, but to give it the very name that was waiting for it somewhere, as if thing and name had been sad without each other. That's a woman in an Arctic fox costume singing, "Don't you worry 'bout a thing, baby." I confuse worry with darkness in the shape of leaves flows over a building, black ellipses on the bay, slipping and falling into place. So I think actually this happened when I was reading one of those emailed poems from the Poetry Foundation, and it was by H.D., and I found myself stealing a line of H.D.'s, and so then I just kind of wrote a quasi H.D. poem and dedicated it to her. So vessels for H.D. Hopeful vessels, a few petals thrown up overnight, fragile amber flutes, the sun's grail cups, were not meant. Beauty, you've sexted me too often. Your pert leaves coming to a fine point at the glass stop at nothing. If we hear the same sequence twice, then someone's flaunting inner logic. But the wind loose in copper chimes is now far more. Rankings. Screw smug survivors talking about us as if we weren't quite here. We never really loved them. And screw time, which pancakes things but also makes distinctions. We have time to watch versions, then parodies, and rank them, to play pin the tail on the apocalypse, and define our terms. To engulf is to cover or surround. A gulf is a chasm. And this next poem is based on a William Carlos Williams poem. And, basically I love Williams. But this poem, when I read it, irritated me. It's called Widow's Lament in Springtime. And it's all about how she wants to drown herself now that her husband is dead. And even though I wrote a sort of elegy too, but this was Williams putting these words in this woman's mouth. And also it starts, sorrow is my own yard. So I wrote this kind of starting off playing around with that. Old woman's lament in autumn. Sorrow is my corner store where jack-o'-lantern balloons get high on the last helium. The end cap is gold today with numbered bags of Werther's originals. No one is Werther. Last night a newscaster mentioned an elderly victim. Don't call me that. I'm old and obdurate. Just 3 more now, I think. Flux. Come on, poets, word it till it's yours or no one's. The way the clock on the nightstand, longhand bonking the numbers feverishly, is no one's. Sing muse of who's what in this deluge. The flux of dreaming carries language with it. A narrator must stand aside and mimic. Where is he when the whole worm burns from mouth to anus? What is he if the worm refuses? And this one's actually called Hate. It's a new poem too. And I started writing it when I was just by chance looking at the back cover of the New Yorker. Just by chance. Anyway, hate. The market hates itself just as much as you hate it. Look, In this spread for leather products, a stern-faced man in pink pants and a bomber jacket stands on satin sheets in front of leopard print wallpaper holding a small briefcase or purse. The market hates you even more than you hate yourself. And then just because we can't end on hate, one more. Give pause. Before we knew what pleasure meant, we were multiplying, going forth into surrounding space until all space was pain. Someone was mimicking our squawks and jerks as if they'd been deliberate, as if to say, do that again. This was love, not mockery, so we believed. What if someone saw you in the tub, you teased, as if my house, my head, your head, was crammed with hostile relatives? Let us give pause. When one has rippled and recovered the image of the sky again, one is most oneself. All right, so that's it for the reading part. So now, whoops. I hope you could hear me. Apparently the microphone was like that. So now I'm supposed to take questions, and if you have a question, raise your hand and someone will come to you with a microphone. So you don't have to have questions, but if you want to ask me anything, you could. Or you could run away.
As someone who reads and thinks about science and that finds its way into your poetry, have you found anything interesting or amusing coming back the other direction from scientists who read your poems?
A little bit, yeah, surprisingly. I was in Spain recently, and partly that was because I had been in a correspondence with a Spanish physicist who was an amateur poet and also a sort of journalist too on the side and had published some stories. And we'd been corresponding, and he was the one who was talking to me about the speed of light that I put into that poem. And he helped to translate some of my poems into Spanish. There was another poet who was working with him, so I had a book just come out in Spanish, and he helped translate it. So when I was in Spain, we had dinner. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, I've made a couple physicist friends. Yeah, but not a whole lot. Anybody else? Oh, you're
I have
quiet.
a question.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your transition into teaching and what brought you to that?
What brought me to teaching?
Yeah.
Oh, money. That's easy. All writers, or most writers, the majority of writers, back it down, the majority of writers end up getting teaching jobs because that's what it turns out we're supposedly officially qualified to do, is teach. So, yeah, you have to make money, so I don't want to sound cynical about it because it's a better job than most, but that's pretty much what happens. Is that's what you're officially qualified to do in the United States anyway. In some other countries, like in Spain and certainly in Mexico, I hear writers and even poets often work in journalism, but it's less so here.
Do you think there's an antagonism between the humanities or the arts and the sciences? Is there a problem between those two ways of thinking?
Well, I don't think there has to be a problem between the ways of thinking, but there's a practical problem with the way resources are allocated at universities, for sure, that puts us at odds, because at least at the university from which I just retired, the sciences get tremendous, budgets and amounts of money and huge salaries, and the humanities are kind of squashed down, and so. And then if you just listen to the media, there's all this promotion of careers in STEM. You've heard that phrase, right? Science, technology, and the M is math, and I don't know what the E is, but you know, STEM. And trying to get everyone to go into that, but there's really not room for everyone in that, actually. So I mean, that's what's valued. And the humanities, not so much, but we're having this humanities festival, though. I don't know if it's a different way of thinking. I mean, I don't want to speak for the sciences, but I think that from what I have read, so many mathematicians and physicists use the word beauty. They talk about their equations as being beautiful, and especially when they're really concise and yet express a lot. So there's, you know, some resonance there, I think, with poetry. And I know physicists like Einstein always said that they visualized their ideas. So, you know, they more than it coming in words, or even before it came in numbers, it would come as images. So I think that there are connections to the arts, probably, in the ways of thinking. Yeah. Wait for the microphone, though.
Sorry, you were ahead of me.
Thanks. I have a question about your thought process, your creative process, which from my limited exposure seems wonderfully winnowed down to the essence. And so I wonder if you begin with large thoughts and tomes that you edit down, or if you really begin kind of similarly to where you end up.
Well, I don't begin by writing, you know, a huge amount, but I guess it does begin in a way that's more diffuse as I try to work towards what I'm aiming at, you know. So often I just have a kind of that vague sense that it's over there, you know, it's in that corner, what I want to say, it's somewhere over there, if you can follow that metaphor. So, you know, I'm just kind of striking at until I hit something, and then I go, oh, there it was, you know, that's it. So yeah, I guess it gets usually a bit more concrete and winnowed as I go on. But it's not like I start with, you know, a 50-line poem and then just edit it back. Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
It's more an elegy than a eulogy, actually, now. Because now that I think of it, a eulogy praises the person, and an elegy mourns. It's more like mourning. He's fine with it, you know. I mean, it's just about missing someone. It really wouldn't have to be him. It's not all that personally about him. It's more about our neighborhood and what we see every day in our neighborhood, and what it would be like to be in the neighborhood but not be seeing it with someone all the time, you know. So no, he doesn't feel like that's creepy or something. He's used to me.
So my other question is, do you write every day?
Not every day. Many days. Most days I try. It doesn't always work. But, you know, some days are just not conducive to that.
My question is kind of related to the question about the sciences, and it's something I've been thinking about a lot myself. And that is just that I wonder what you feel is or would be the appropriate role of poetry in public life right now in the United States. Like, why we keep doing it?
That's a good question.
What we can do.
That's a good question. I read an essay by Ben Lerner, but I'm not sure it's been published yet, about, I can't remember if it's called The Hatred of Poetry, but it's sort of about why we keep doing it, despite all of the way we're all uncomfortable with it, and all of the way it's not very rewarding. And it seems like, I guess he was saying there's an ideal virtual poem behind every poem that someone somewhat misses the mark in actuality, and that virtual poem is somehow like an emblem of subjectivity itself, you know, that the poem sort of represents being able to be a subject and have subjectivity. So it might be something like that. There's so much in our world that really either erases subjectivity or gives you a faux version of it, like Facebook, you know. So I don't know, maybe something like that. think I get the feeling I only answered part of your question. Why people keep trying to write poetry. Oh yeah, what should be the public role of poetry? Well, that's really hard because I'm always uncomfortable with, having a public role. The Poetry Foundation is doing a good job of being, the public face of poetry. It's putting resources out there. I'm less comfortable with this whole poet laureate business. There's a lot of wince-making stuff about public roles for me, but maybe that's just me. I always want to be in the opposition. Anybody else?
I feel like I sort of don't want to ask this question because I feel like I sort of know its answer, but I'm just wondering, I'm just thinking about length. Like, I think as a poet, you feel like you've really, you know your length, in this way. But what does that feel like to you from the inside? And do you tinker with it? And how does that happen?
Yeah, I would like to write longer poems. Just because why not? Why not break the mold? Why not do it? And especially a lot of my old friends started writing really, really long poems, like projects, book-length project things. And I have tried, but I don't seem to be able to do it. And sometimes if I get something that's longer, I end up cutting it back. And it seems like, I don't know. I don't know why. I know what it feels like, and I tried to. When I first started out, I wrote really short poems, like 4, 5, 6 lines, and then I decided, well, really got to get longer than this, and I decided the way I could do that was by breaking them. And so I have all those sections, section dividers. If you've seen my poems, they very often have different separated sections, and that's one way for me to expand. Because then I don't have to have that sort of sense of continuity or burden of continuity. I can go in different directions. I've kind of given up now on the idea that I'm actually going to be able to get to 100 lines or something, I was trying to, I think the longest poem that I've written and published is maybe 3 pages. So yeah, that's just, I think it is what it is at this point. But I have tried. Thank you.
I was thinking about the question or the issue brought up about, what's the public role of poetry? And I'm wondering if the definition of poetry can or has changed, evolved, and will continue to do that. I had a friend, an artist, he liked found poetry, right? Turn on red. I mean, things like that,
Oh, uh-huh.
But
you mean I see what you mean. He uses found language, or he's
well,
into found
it's a
language.
different way to sort of think of things that are poetic.
Yeah.
So anyway, just the definition of poetry, I guess that would be my
That's
question.
always changing. Yeah, totally. It used to be that if you weren't writing in a recognizable, smooth meter and rhyme, you weren't writing poetry. So, for a while, it was like that. Now, I think the found language thing has been around for a long time. Eliot did it in The Wasteland, right? But it's been really big lately, in so-called conceptual writing and FLARF. And in all, across the board, really. There's a lot of just kind of, let's look at what's there. Let's take a look at what's being presented to us, and just we can look at it better if we recontextualize it. If you call it a poem, people will pay a different kind of attention to it. So yeah, I think part of what a poem is a matter of the way that you invite someone to pay attention to it. That's true with conceptual art too. And it pushes, the limits sometimes of attention or of what we can attend to. But I think those are interesting discussions to have. What is a poem?
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
So as someone who isn't very involved in poetry, what are a few of the most powerful things I can take away and learn from someone who is like yourself?
So what can a non-poet learn from poetry or from a poet? Well, I think just really the value of paying attention to language, because a lot of language enters your mind, whether you know it or not, all the time, and a lot of that language tries to manipulate you, and you absorb it. We all do, and poetry kind of trains you to look at the words and think about what they're doing and everything that they could mean. And also, it allows you to sort of repurpose them, I guess. So you can make this language that's already pushed into all these shapes, you can take it and push it into different shapes. So I guess that's probably worth knowing and worth doing.
Thank you very much, everybody. You can join Rae outside in the library for a book signing.